Welcome to USC Rossier's Leadership Month and today's webinar, Lunch with Leaders, District and School Site Leaders. Before we begin, I would like to review the process for submitting a question for our panelists. Please type your question in the Q&A box that can be accessed by clicking on the Q&A icon located at the bottom of your screen. We have reserved times towards the end of the webinar for your questions and hope to get to as many as possible. We also received a number of questions via the registration form and have tried to incorporate as many of them as possible into our structured Q&A at the beginning of the session. If you are planning to share your experience at today's session on social media, we encourage you to include the Leadership Month hashtag #RossierLeads, which appears at the bottom of the top of the screen. Lastly, please note a recording of this webinar will be available in the next few days. A link will be sent via email. And now I would like to introduce our moderator. Greg Franklin earned his BA in 1983 and his EdD in 1997 from USC. He currently serves as Superintendent of Tustin Unified School District. Greg also serves as Chair of DSAG, the Dean Superintendent Advisory Group. At this point, I will turn the session over to you, Greg.
Thank you very much, Australia. Welcome to everybody who joined us. I think you are taking advantage of one of the things that is a strength of the USC Rossier School, and that is this leadership network that we all have access to. Certainly we learn a lot as we go through our EdD program, but unlike many other programs, it continues to help us learn even after our graduation date. So good on you for joining us, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation with today's panelists. I want to mention a couple of things. Just that leadership at whatever level you are exerting and displaying leadership is crucial, whether you are a teacher or already an administrator at a site or district level. There has never been a time where leadership has been more important. So I really appreciate people's interest in learning about people's paths and how other folks have sort of maneuvered their way or navigated their way through their own career path. I think we can learn from each other. As Australia said, we have about an hour and 15 minutes for today's presentation. We're going to take some prepared questions that our panelists will respond to, and then we do have time for Q&A at the end. So with that, I'm gonna invite each panelist in turn to introduce themselves, a little bit about their career path, their USC graduation date, and their current title and institution that they're working at. Let's start with Shawna Dinkins. Welcome, Shawna.
Hello, welcome. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Shawna Dinkins. I am a proud graduate of the class of '09. Yes, I started at 5. It's okay. Happy to be here. I am currently the Assistant Sup of Educational Services in the Lynwood Unified School District. I've served in various roles from teacher, instructional coach, developing readers and writers expert, program specialist, director of categorical programs, special education, principal, and now assistant sup.
Thank you, Shawna. We'll go to Lawton Gray.
There we go. Oh, there we go again. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Franklin, for having me. My name is Lawton Gray. I'm principal at John Muir High School, Early College Magnet. I am the class of 2017 from USC Rossier, and I've been a principal. Well, I taught math for, I want to say, 6 years in Pasadena, and I've been a dean, assistant principal at a middle school for 10 years. Yes, 10 years at a middle school. And now I'm high school principal at my alma mater in Pasadena, California.
It's really special to go back to your one of the places you attended, I know.
Yes, that's my diploma back there, high school diploma.
That's terrific. Let's next introduce Matt. You have to turn on your video and unmute, Matt.
Sorry, Dr. Franklin, I completely froze there. So thanks, I missed my introduction, but thanks Dr. Franklin, for having me. And I am a 2007 proud graduate of the EdD program at USC Rossier. Currently, I'm the assistant superintendent in Beverly Hills Unified School District. I'm the assistant superintendent for human resources. I've followed really a traditional pathway, I would call it, in education, where I started out as a teacher. I coached athletics, then did some quasi-administrative site-based things as a dean, as an athletic director, then shifted to assistant principal, then was a middle and high school principal for about 7 years, and then did multiple district office positions. As I said, currently I'm the assistant superintendent human resources in Beverly Hills, and up to recently, as the end of June, I was the same role, same title, assistant HR in Palos Verdes Peninsula Unified School District.
Very good. Sounds traditional to me. Appreciate that, Matt. And our newest EdD graduate on the panel, Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. Yes, I graduated in May 2020, so proud. And so my experience is having been a bilingual and dual immersion teacher in Hayward, Oakland area, and then assistant principal for 4 years. I was a principal for 5 years at Title I schools, and I've spent the last 5 years as a principal in a Fullerton School District at a recently awarded National Blue Ribbon and California Distinguished School.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Congratulations. We'll begin our questions, and each of the panelists can participate, of course, but I'm going to call on certain panelists to kick us off on certain questions. And the first one is, let's begin the discussion by having each of you describe the journey. I think we just did that. No, maybe not. Describe your career journey, starting with your first job in education up until the current role. Lawton, you want to start?
Okay, so my first job after graduating from Morehouse College with a degree in mathematics was I taught math at Pasadena High School. And I did that for 6 years, totally loved the classroom, enjoyed teaching, but felt that I could do more as an administrator. And so I just happened to actually be in a program for my master's with a friend whose name is Gerald Topalian, and he was in Temple City. And I never heard of Temple City, but he said, you know, apply and come out. I applied, found out that's a very big SC district, just so you know. And I got hired as a dean at Temple City High School and did that for 2 years. Absolutely loved it. And then I had opportunity to go out to Chaffee, join Union High School District, and went there for 2 years as an AP, pardon me, for a little while, wasn't 2 years, for a little while as an AP. And then Temple City lured me back as an AP. For me, it's really important to be close to home. I was starting out with a young family, wife was pregnant, and the hours at a high school was crazy for, I'm sure if you work at a high school, you kind of know. And it just, for me, I needed to be close to home. So it was a family decision that I come back closer to home, and then was at high school for 2 more years, and I had the opportunity to I wanted to expand my horizon and work at different levels. So I took a job as a middle school principal and absolutely loved it. And I was, like I said before, I was there for 10 years, but loved every day of being in a middle school. And so, but then the opportunity arose after I finished my doctoral program at SC to come back to my alma mater. And I couldn't pass up the chance. So I decided to come back to Pasadena and have loved being at a high school. It's on my 3rd year. This is the most challenging year ever. The uncertainty is just ridiculous, but we'll get to that later. But that's pretty much been my journey.
Sorry. We'll learn lessons as we go through and listen to everybody's journey, but I just want to draw out some as I hear them. And I've observed these lessons over and over in people's career. Lawton mentioned place versus promotion. And I think that that's a theme everybody has to figure out for themselves, whether you want to promote as fast as possible. It means you might have to move districts, maybe even relocate your home, or whether you're more committed to a place, which means your career might not move quite as rapidly, but then you'll be more invested certainly in that locale. Thanks, Lawton. Let's go to Elizabeth.
Sure. So I started to share a little bit about the trajectory. I actually stumbled upon education in college, taking a summer job as a self-testing coordinator at a junior high. And so I just, there was something about working with children in junior high who hadn't yet acquired English language acquisition that really was unsettling for me. And so, sorry. I decided to minor in education and get a real sense of where I could make an impact. And so I went into teaching, and I knew that I wanted to diversify my experience. And so therefore, being a bilingual dual immersion teacher, wanted to broaden my scope to, honestly, I was already thinking ahead of like how to be marketable, how to, have different experiences in your resume, et cetera. And so I went into being assistant principal at Cherryland Elementary School in Hayward Unified, decided to transition over to Southern California, was an assistant principal in Rolling Unified for 3 years. And they got tapped on the shoulder like, you know what, you've been in AP for too long. You need to go and lead a school. And so yeah, the rest is history with being a principal. Now I'm in my 12th year as a principal, and I feel like I'm really making an impact. But I do think that having just graduated from USC with a doctorate has heightened my credibility. And so I really value that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Shawna, you want to share?
Sure. So my career was non-traditional. Started very traditional, but didn't end that way. And I think that's important to highlight because you have to be willing to take risk in light of all the wonderful advice that's already been given. So I started as an ELD teacher, then I became an English teacher, and I taught for 8 years. And then I was asked to take on a role as literacy coach. There was a big secondary literacy initiative in the district I served at that time. And so I took that challenge. And then that challenge led to other opportunities at the district level. And I ended up in program improvement during our NCLB days. And I ended up downtown, big district. And when I left that district, I was, I would say a little in the gray because I was moving about 40 miles away from where I lived, and I didn't want to commute. My children were 9 and 2.5 at the time. And so we moved to this little city called Chino, not Chino Hills, Chino, there's 2. And I started looking for jobs close to home because my children were young and the commute was just unbearable, which is going to be ironic in a second. And so I applied for a directorship. I was director of categoricals. Program improvement was really big at that time, and I could not believe I got that job before being a site administrator. And I'm going to speak about the impact of that later on. So I became director of categoricals, and then I had an opportunity to be director of special education, which was was very impactful to my career journey. And my then superintendent said to me, I know where you're headed and where you want to go. And Shawna, I need you to go to the site. And lucky me, I got to go to a K-8 school. Having been a high school teacher, this was full circle for me because now I was going to get that elementary and middle school experience. I already had the high school. It also happened to be the school that my youngest daughter still attended. So I got to be her principal. She may have a different version of that story, but it was a wonderful time. I got to transition that school to year-round, participate on different committees within the district, finish my doctorate while as a director with 2 small children. And then this opportunity came for me through my wonderful relationships that actually were forged in my EdD program. 2 women who have been instrumental in supporting me are Dr. Stephanie Phillips and Dr. Hasmik Denalian, both powerful former female superintendents. And it was actually Dr. Denalian who looked at me and said, what are you doing? it's time for you to go to the next level. And so it was because of her urging and her push of all the wonderful mentors in my life that I'm now the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services in Lynwood. And yes, I went from principal to assistant sup. And so huge leap, a lot of learning along the way, but immensely rich experience. And so the irony is I chose a job to be close to home, and now I commute about an hour each way every day, but I'm happy to do so. My kids are older now, 21 and almost 16.
Thank you, Shawna. And still living in beautiful Chino.
Yes, I'm not leaving till the daughter graduates high school. 2 more years and then I'll move.
And Matt, you want to share your journey?
Yeah, so I started, I was a teacher. I grew up right around the area of Detroit, Michigan, and started teaching at the high school that I went to, and was having a really good experience. But I had this moment in time and I had visited California a few times and was vacationing quite a bit and really loved it. And had this moment and I saw myself almost entering the administrative field back then and realized, all right, it's now or never if I'm going to make a change. So I packed up and moved out to California, and luckily, and I think fortunately, landed in Los Angeles Unified School District. And at that point in time, I don't think I had any aspiration of being an administrator, but it happened quickly. Just the opportunities. I was coaching, and then the athletic director left. The assistant principal came and said, "You need to be the athletic director." And it's not like I had much of a choice. Sure, I'll do that. Then it became, "Hey, you're going to be the dean. You're going to be the WASH chair," and all of these administrative things started coming. And I felt myself as a kind of a natural leader, and it just started to make sense that that was the pathway that I wanted to take. But I realized in California, I didn't have a ton of connections. I didn't have a great network. So at that point in time, that's when I decided to apply to the EdD program at Rossier. And I kept continuing to hear about this Trojan network, and you got to join, and this is the place that you'll find a network. Because people ask me, "What do you want out of this?" I really want to learn, obviously, but I want a network. And they said, "Well, you got to go to USC." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I applied and got in, and I will tell you that it's really transformed my life and my career, because it was true. I met so many great people. At that same time, I became an assistant principal and was commuting, did about 3 years of that, and was commuting a far way. And kind of like Lawton, some of the others you hear, it was like, okay, I'm over this. I'm doing my doctorate, I'm commuting, doing all of this. And I met somebody Dr. Franklin knows, Dr. Grant Litvin, who was in my program. And Grant said, "Hey, we got a principal job open, middle school principal." And the timing wasn't right. It was in March, and I said, "I can't leave. There's no way." And unfortunately, my mentor and coach at that time, my boss, said, "If it was at the end of the year, would you take it?" And I said, "Of course." And he said, "Well, then you got to go. Timing may never be right. Go." And I joined, like Lawton said, some of these communities, some of these school districts are big, heavy SE folks, and Torrance was one of them. And I mean, everybody had their EdD. So I felt like I fit right in, right? Here I am. I landed in this place among all these great Trojans. And from there, I was a middle and high school. And again, I was a middle school principal, loved it, was my happiest job until this day, still my happiest job. But Dr. Tim Stowe, who's now the superintendent in Torrance, said, "You're a high school guy. You got to take," at that time was Dr. Litvin's position at North High, as he was going to Los Alamitos High School. And I said, "No, we'll never do that. No, I don't want to be a high school. I've done high school, no life, blah, blah, blah." And then a second later, I was like, "Yeah, I'll be the high school principal." Right. You're right. This is who I am. So I think those positions and being a principal, again, were without a doubt, my favorite positions. Love them. But I think, between commutes and following people, I've had some opportunities to have some really, really great, bosses. They're not really a boss. They're more mentors and coaches to me that have said, that have pulled me along and brought me different places. I'd mentioned one earlier, in Vivian Ekchan, and I was working downtown, and she said, "You're coming to the Valley with me." And I said, how do you tell Vivian no? You know, so it was one of those things that I didn't enjoy that commute, but I knew I'm following a tremendous leader and somebody who would help me grow. And so my career has kind of taken commutes, family in some ways, but then really mentors, coaches, and people that I trusted, believed in, and said, I'm going to grow tremendously. No matter what my commute is, I've got to go to that position. So I've had awesome ones along the way. And I thank the Rossier School, because in some way, all of those people have been connected. That's our common theme. Is Vivian came after me, but she's still part of the Trojan family. So that's my career and to where I am today.
I appreciate those comments, Matt, because we're talking about career path and positions that people hold, but you really can't separate any of that from the people. And so I think you hit on one of the things that I would highlight, and that is, don't just look for a job, look for a job where you're going to work with the people that you're going to learn and grow from. And I think that that's a key issue. And I don't want to be redundant, but I'm going to pull out these things that I'm hearing as lessons, because I think they're worth repeating. Every one of you talked about getting tapped on the shoulder by somebody, recognizing your leadership and the work that you've done. The best way to get promoted, do good work, right? Not to plan and, you know, get a little cabal of people and figure out strategically where you're going to go. The best way is to do good work. It'll get recognized and you'll get tapped. The other thing is, I heard some people, more than one of you, say you got to be a principal. And in Tustin Unified, you are not going to become a director or higher unless you run a school, because the key people in any school district, I think, are principals. They are the ones that make it work, and the rest of us support them. The best way to support a principal is to have been a principal. So don't try and skip that step. It's so crucial. And I heard each of you speak fondly of your experience as principal. There's nothing like it being the principal of a school. So thanks for doing that. We're going to go right to our second question. And some of you have already addressed this, so don't feel pressure to do it again. And we're going to start with Matt. And I feel like you may have just done this a little bit, Matt. How has your EdD prepared you for the past positions and your current role? Do you want to add anything to what you've just mentioned?
Yeah, I think I will just maybe take it a little deeper and then go in a little different direction. Just building upon the network and connections. What I have found through my network and connections is really through the EdD program is people that can be brutally honest with me and I can be brutally honest with. And meaning, as I always say, when you ascend to certain positions, your title, I think people can become in some ways less and less honest with you, right? Or don't feel that they can share certain things. So through my program and my network, I have found people that to this day, Dr. Jan Britz, I think of, who's somebody I can call and she can smack me over the head and say I'm being a fool, you know, and somebody who really challenges me. And I know my conversation with her is going to be really tough, but she's going to get the best out of me. And she's going to really, really dig deep. And she laughs because she says, you know, I'm brutally honest. I said, of course you are. And I think so from that side of things, the EdD program, again, that connection, leadership, the network there. The other part of it, though, is at the time, you know, the EdD was this, I always saw it as the big change between a PhD and EdD is how practical it was. And one of my thoughts during my dissertation when I was doing my defense, the question was, you know, how has this been practical for you? And my dissertation in the EdD program was around leadership transitions. And when I was asked that question, I was in my 15th day, I believe, of being a middle school principal. And I said, I'll tell you how it's relevant. I had a very prescriptive pathway in that transition and was prepared for it. And I felt what I had gained through that dissertation helped me in that position. And every single position past then, I go back, I look at my research, I look at the data, and I think of the work that I did, and I'm really prescriptively planning those first 90 days, if you will. And I don't know gosh, I'm in a month here in Beverly Hills, but I will tell you that that plan has helped me expedite my transition, and I feel that I'm having an impact much quicker because of the work that I did in the program and what it's done for me.
How about any of our other panelists? Lawton, you want to?
For me, I would agree with Matt. The network, and for me, it's the network in terms of going through that program together with that group of folks we had together. We were able to talk to each other. We were able to be vulnerable and be very honest. And that in turn helped us grow within the program and within our job structures. I think taking that network that we created at USC in our little group and making that to a larger group, we now meet as principals in the San Gabriel Valley and high school principals, and we're able to talk and be vulnerable and have those same type of ideas and structures that I felt at USC, I feel have been brought into our other structures that we are using now, especially within the state of schools right now, to have those vulnerable conversations, to say that we're stuck and to work with each other, figure out ways to support each other, and how I can take something that one of my colleagues at CV is doing. I see Linda is in this meeting. Hi, Linda. And bring that to something that we can do within our whole area to help support us, whether it's how do we register students, how do we do promotion, how do we do proms, how do we do those big things that are occurring right now that we need answers to. And we may not have those answers right now from the district per se. We can at least have someone to bounce ideas off of. And so that was huge within the program, and that's been huge going forward for me in terms of this position right now.
How about Elizabeth or Shawna?
Oh, I'm happy to say, so I can speak very firmly that in the midst, I think it was in my second year, going into my third, when I took that huge leap to directorship. And everything I learned in that program was a part of what I would deem success. Number one, something you've already said, and I believe this about a lot of things, you let your work speak for itself. Because good work is the demonstration of that knowledge and skill set, right? But I remember being a director and working with principals. And it wasn't foreign for me to work with principals because I was a program specialist in LA Unified for program improvement. So we were working with principals and leadership teams. That was our work. It wasn't foreign for me, but having that framework of Bowman and Dill and looking at things through those four lenses, being able to really separate your experience versus the person that you're dealing with. That skill set for me, that came out of that program. And I'll never forget, it was one of the essential lessons that I learned about mastery of things versus performance. Because, you know, you go to SC, and I came from UCLA, but that's another conversation. So I'm a Brogan, but we'll talk about that later. You know, you're used to doing well in school. And I remember us being upset in class because we weren't really getting that feedback that we wanted. And I'll never forget this, and it stayed with me forever. And that professor looked me in my eye and said, "This is about mastery, not performance." And what a Trojan does is they figure it out. And that stayed with me. And so when now I'm in the seat to build the capacity of principals, I take those lessons with me. I tell them, read Bowman and Dill, because dealing with people through those four frames will help you when you are facing events such as what we're all facing right now in this storm. It will give you a different perspective. And lastly, because it's not about being right, it is about doing the right, true, and just thing at all times. And that learning I got in my EdD program.
Thanks for sharing that, Shawna. But, you know, it doesn't matter so much where you start, it's where you finish. So you're a Trojan. Elizabeth, any comments?
So just the experience of being able to broaden the scope of influence that I want to have for students, and also just like at what altitude, having that ability to have those conversations. I, for one, was very interested at USC because of the social justice component. And so I don't know what you call someone who went to UC Berkeley and USC. I don't know what that connection is, but I do know that I wanted to continue that trajectory of mine, which has been a passion of mine. And so I really appreciated getting to mix the theory with the practical, because as a principal, I need answers. People want answers, people want direction. I want to be able to provide that. And so being able to do those things at the same time, and knowing that I am positioning myself for the next chapter of my career, where I can then broaden my scope and influence on students, is what's really encouraging for me, like what more I can do, and having that experience of being in classes that really challenged your mind frame. And so whether it was a professor of asking those questions of you, or whether it was your colleagues asking, it's the caliber of people that I got to work with that really helped me grow. And so it was what I thought I knew was not, or see it a different way. And so that is invaluable. And so getting that experience at USC is obviously something that I appreciate. I got more out of it than what I intended, and great friendships came out of that. And so, and great learning, and we're still continuing. We're in book clubs now, like we are trying to figure it out. We're trying to see how we can continue to grow as professionals.
Great. I want to take a break from our questions and remind our participants and our observers that the Q&A is open. And so don't forget that if you have something that you want to ask a particular panelist, or something more generally, make sure and put it in the Q&A, and we'll cover that before we all get wrapped up. So let's go to the next question. This is a double whammy, because we're going to solve the problems of the world in the next 10 minutes. And who better than Elizabeth to lead us off? How has the pandemic and the emerging conversation around race, equity, and justice impacted your current role?
So thank you for recognizing that this is a very loaded question, and it is definitely twofold. So I'm going to start with the first part, like with the pandemic. And I really think that the pandemic has forced all educators at whatever level you're at to rethink, reevaluate, restructure our views on teaching and learning, really. And not only the teaching and learning for students, but for our teachers as well. And so how do we optimize those experiences? How do we ensure that our teachers live into that theory of being lifelong learners? How do we continue to do that as administrators? And so one of the direct impacts for me in my role is to ask myself, what can I do to facilitate the learning of adults and that adult learning theory of andragogy to help best meet their needs? Because I recognize I cannot outteach them. And I'm not even going to try to do that. And they're professionals, and I need to value that experience for them. And so, the steps that I've taken to support and guide them as those professionals is part of that learning theory. Where can I ensure their inclusiveness throughout the process? How do I bring them in? Where do I do those temperature checks of, like, is this meeting the needs and questions that you have at this moment? I'm not going to pretend to know what it is that you need out of these experiences, but if you can tell me what is it you need, then my job is to provide it for you to facilitate your work. And how can I provide ongoing training as a means of being responsive to their needs? Also, along with that is the continual visibility. So although we're not physically, like I'm physically in your classrooms, I'm in your Zooms. I am doing the PD right alongside you. How can you value what I say if I don't experience it as well? And so learning alongside my teachers has been an ongoing goal for me. And also to continue to link the work that we're doing to those higher goals that we have as a school, because it's easy to lose that collective vision with all the influx of information. And so on a practical level, also just trying to set a calm tone with my teachers. There's already inevitable anxiety as it is. And so nobody learns well in chaos. And so having that teaching and learning idea, what do I do to filter that information to only provide my teachers with the essential that they need? And, just like I said, being very responsive to what can I do? And if you need me to do nothing, what I need to do to help you is get out of your way, then let me know. let me do that. And so that's been my direct impact, and where I see my role is that of a facilitator. And so
Thanks for sharing.
The next part of it, insofar as race and equity, it really shouldn't be a new conversation to anybody, because if you have a social justice lens, it's imperative to prompt the resurfacing of culture responsive teaching, which has been around for some time now. And so this pandemic and this situation has helped to reorient and re-energize our commitment to all students. And, so what are we doing? And so in preparation for this, to create the space to be able to talk to my staff about that and have action items, not just a conversation. Conversation is absolutely imperative and important, but what action steps? And so I've tried to equip myself by reading and becoming and continuing with that lifelong learning. And so I'm right now currently reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Kendi. And so what really resonated with me is a quote that he said: the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. So in order to treat some persons equally, we must treat them differently. So similarly, it reminds me of the words of Rick Warden, where fair is not everybody getting the same thing. Fair is everybody getting what they need. And so what I am committing to is asking myself, and I think we can all do that irrespective of whatever leadership capacity we're at in education, is what I'm saying or whatever decision I'm making, am I creating or am I perpetuating a hierarchy of human value? Am I being inclusive of all voices? Am I in fact supporting a racist policy through my actions or inactions? Because not saying something and not doing something is also saying something. Yeah. And so some of the other questions is what I'm doing really truly impacting my students? We had this conversation about tweeting and putting things out there. And to me, just on the ground, my students are not going to see my tweets. That's not what matters to them. What matters to them is the connections I have with them. What matters to them is the mentoring that I provide to them. What matters to them is, am I bringing kids into leadership roles? Are they on my student leadership? Am I ensuring that they're represented in my GATE classes? Am I checking in with them? And am I creating opportunities for them? Am I addressing their mental health? Their instructional gaps? Am I providing differentiation, intervention? That's the impact they're going to have. It's not going to be all these external things that I do. It's going to be how I am directly influencing them. And so, I
appreciate those comments. And those two topics, as you mentioned, Elizabeth, are so broad and really separate. Let's stick with this one. It's such an important one about race, equity, and justice. Any other panelists like to participate?
Sure. I like to add, here in Lynwood, I am extremely fortunate. We have had an equity department fully dedicated to this very issue, as well as others, since 2016, led by Trojan, Dr. Patricia Brentsenko, who does amazing work with our equity warriors here in Lynwood. For me, it's not about what the pandemic has done for equity, because that is part of our mission: social justice, access, and equity. It's more or less as put a broader magnifying glass on the disruptions that must now happen for specifically our children of color. When you look at grading practices and sliding scales, and you talk about equity, and like Dr. Leon said, it's not new, but it does draw out some deeply rooted systemic issues in education. Number one, we have to call out that a system will produce what it was meant to. And when you look at the history of education, that system wasn't meant for the children that we serve today. We got to be honest about that. And then we have to look at our policies, our practices and procedures, and say, whom or who does this policy negatively and or positively affect? So being in Lynwood, one of the things that really drew me to the mission here is that we erased all of those, what I like to call gatekeepers, for prerequisites for AP. So any student who wants to take an AP class or an IB class, they're able to do so. And we have a national award for that under the leadership of former Superintendent Dr. Gothold, and the torch still being carried by current Superintendent Dr. Crossway. But it's important we not treat this as a moment. It's not a moment, it is a movement. It is a movement to disrupt the inequities that are systemic and punishes the poor and rewards the privileged. And until we can really start having those hard conversations, the pandemic will come and go. But what will have changed for our students that we serve? And so in my role, that's impactful to me. I go to sleep every night going, what are we doing and what can we do better to impact all children and dismantle this system that has not really been developed to support all students?
Powerful. Thank you, Shawna.
I agree with Dr. Petit-Dinkins and Dr. Leon. I think one of the tougher conversations is to figure out how do we, the pandemic is changing the way we see the way education needs to be done. And I'll say it this way. I know there's some districts that are arguing or having conversations about, well, how do we set up the structure? Do we do a quarter system with students and they have less classes, but they don't have certain classes they wouldn't have the same class over the full semester, but they can focus on 4 classes or 3 classes for 10 weeks and get that information and then move to another set. And I haven't seen any districts go that route yet. I see a lot of districts just sticking with the status quo. And I think these are the times, if you don't change during a pandemic, when will you change? Because I think this is the time that we really need to see some change in how we're doing education. For me, the pandemic is the last 3 months of school exacerbated the achievement gap. I mean, the achievement gap is blown out the water because, as one of my teachers, Dr. Rustin, said here, who's a UCLA guy, but I still must give him a shout out. We're not grading the students now, we're grading their environment. When we're giving these grades to students, we're grading the environment or their home environment, because that's where the learning is done. You know, school is where we level the playing field, where everyone is treated, hopefully, everyone is treated equally. Everyone has access, everyone has opportunity to do what they can do. Especially, like, I'm in an urban school, so my school is 95% Black and brown. So we're working to level the playing field for our students, for all students, but especially our students, because that's the majority of our kids here at the school. But I just think that with this pandemic, we're now grading people's environments. These learning pods that are going on, that's a great idea, but where are they in the communities where they don't have a parent with a college education, where their social capital is not to where they have people that can come in and do these things. The economic capital is not where they can actually employ somebody to come and help teach their kids. So for me, the pandemic is pushing us as our administrators, our counselors, our teaching staff to figure out how do we support the kids that don't have all these extras that, that's just a tough part. The other thing I'll bring up, which is huge to me, is I don't like how the higher ed education is treating this. They're still doing status quo. For me, I have kids, we talk about how we're going to grade students, which is a prime example. Well, to me, there should just be pass or fail right now. Because if I'm at one district and they're giving letter grades, and others are giving pass or fail, unless the UCs and the private colleges say, we're not going to count any of those letter grades, it's just going to be, pass or fail, then that's great. But if not, you're competing against each other in terms of how you're grading your students, how are you giving them credits. It's not set up to support everyone, and it's not a level playing field at all. This pandemic is making it even worse. So our job as educators is to figure out, how do we get to those kids who aren't logging on? How are we getting them access? How are we meeting the needs of those students even more than we have in the past? So, sorry, that's a tough one for me. I stay up at night thinking about that.
Just to put an exclamation point on this leading in difficult times, I just want to read this opening paragraph from an article in the New York Times this morning. The author says, is it possible to reopen school buildings in the fall in a way that keeps kids, educators, staff, and their families and communities safe from COVID-19? Is it possible not to do so without harming them in other ways. Already, school closures have set children behind academically. More than 20 million kids rely on school breakfast and lunch meals. Too many parents are facing the choice between losing their jobs or leaving their children home unsupervised. Vaccinations are down already for these dangerous diseases typically required before students can attend school. The rate has plummeted. Isolating children from their peers exacts social and emotional costs which differ by age group and are nearly impossible to quantify. And whether schools reopen or remain closed, the risks are borne disproportionately by low-income communities and people of color. So if that doesn't, if that.
You're muted, Dr. Franklin.
Yeah, so if that doesn't sober us up about the weight of the decisions we're making and the actions required, I think nothing will. Matt, do you want to add anything about either?
Yeah, I mean, obviously our panelists have spoken a lot. I think from my role, just speaking of the role piece in human resources, we tend to
Matt, you're stuck on my screen. Is he also stuck on your screen? Yeah,
Yes,
I
he's
think
stuck.
your
Yes.
internet got a little bit.
try to bring that focus back to our students and certainly those who are most at risk. So I think I would do that, say that piece.
Great. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to kind of weave them in as we continue with our prepared questions as well. And I'm going to start with, how do you approach leading? We talked about this uncertainty. You're sort of hurting kids by opening schools, possibly with COVID, or you're hurting kids by not opening schools. How do you approach leading in such uncertainty in chaotic times?
Okay, I'll try this one, but it's, oh, go ahead, Dr. Petit-Dinkins. You go.
I'm really trying to be quiet. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. I think traditionally people expect leaders to be calm, but more importantly, to have all the answers. So let me first say what makes this difficult is because there's a mindset that we have the answers. And for the first time in my almost 30-year career, in the words of the professor I already quoted, we're all trying to figure it out. It's that analogy of we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. So the experiences are varied, and making sure that we address the education of students, the taking care of our employees and staff, and ensuring our parents that we are equipped to safely open school in some form. Those are all very daunting tasks, but I'm going to go back to Bowman and Dill. So let's just look at this from that human capital lens. And you think about the capital of the parent, the capital of the student, and then managing the situation we're currently in. And so we figure it out and we find solutions by collaborating, by listening. We have to pay attention to science. What I find unique about this, and I'm going to piggyback on something Mr. Lawton said, Dr. Lawton said, and that was, I'm not just disappointed in the lack of support from just higher education, but from our governance structures. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So we all went to school to do what we do. And I think it unfair that from the beginning of this pandemic, an abundance of responsibility has been placed on the school system. And I don't think it's fair. We're not scientists, we're not epidemiologists, and yet we are probably one of the most disrespected professions when you think about everyone who's considered an essential worker. And so I think it's a dynamic relationship right now because we're expected to have answers that nobody else wants to give. So we have all the data, we have all the science, but yet we're still being, I don't want to say forced, that's not nice. We are still being put up on to make decisions that could very well have harmful effects. And who really wants to take that risk for children, for parents, for students, for employees? I think it a bit unfair, and I think there needs to be more collaboration and higher accountability for this storm that we are all in.
I hate to be sarcastic, but local control. It keeps getting pushed down on us when the questions are hard. It's local.
Yeah, but it's not local, it's national.
That's right.
Yeah.
Matt,
Oh, sorry, Dr. Franklin.
I want to give Matt an opportunity if he'd like to add anything.
Yeah, I think that I'm just hearing some of the things that Shawna had mentioned is like the collaboration. I think from our perspective, there's tons of listening going on. There's tons of discussion. I think that the tough part that I see is that you have data, you have science, but you also have politics coming into play as well. So I think of the two communities that I've recently been in, Palos Verdes and Beverly Hills, right? We have data, we have scientists, we have people that we're approaching to collaborate with to help us. So that piece is nice, right? Out of all of this, we're reaching out to our community members and we're really helping each other and supporting each other. The problem is it's just you have that other side of the politics and the political piece that everybody has an idea and their thoughts and opinions on things. And I think that really makes it challenging for schools, school districts. The other part though that I do love about, I mean, again, there's not great things, but I think one thing that's come out of it is that collaboration. You see superintendents communicating constantly. You see people in folks, assistant soups and principals that are constantly in this, we're in this together type of feeling, right? Because again, the national government, the state government has said, yes, it's yours to deal with, right? So we're like, wait a minute, how can we work on this together? And I hope that we take some of the lessons learned from this if we move beyond the pandemic and continue on with some of the great lessons that we've learned and some of the great practices that have shown, from these times.
I want to refer everybody to an article, if you get a chance to look it up. Margaret Wheatley wrote an article in 2002. I think it was included maybe as a chapter of a book about leading when change is out of our control. And she wrote it in 2002, obviously right after the 9/11 incident in 2001. So it's as pertinent today as it was then. And she had drawn some lessons, several of which you've already touched on, which is relationships. So when things are uncertain, make sure you're investing in the relationships, because together you can do almost anything, right? And the second is prepare for scenarios. And so always be, it's the bullet you don't hear coming that's going to get you. So always be preparing for a variety of scenarios and getting people together and working on those jointly. It's a great article. If you get a chance, it's worth the reading. I want to go to another question, particularly for Shawna and Elizabeth, and talk about leading as women, especially now. We talk about race and equity and justice being part of the national conversation, but I think that gender roles is right up there as well. Can you guys respond to that and share a little bit about your own experiences and thoughts?
Dr. Leon, you want to take the lead? I can take it. It's
Sure, I'm happy to share. And so what I consider to maybe be some unique challenges, and because I'm living it, that face in my career journey is there was especially a woman of color, there was a time in my career that I was reminded that I was fortunate to be in my position because I didn't look the part. And so after moving past the shock of where does merit have anything to do with this, there's two routes you can take, because we we social beings are responsible for how we react to what is told to us, and then what our actions are going to be after that. And for me, it fueled my ambition to refocus conversations on merit. And so I was also, in my experience, advised to take small incremental professional steps. And although this was with positive intent, I'm sure, to protect me from setbacks, it does impact your psyche, and it rattles your ambition if you let it. And so, you know, what do I strive to do now if confronted with these same scenarios is challenge people to check their bias with, like, is that the same advice you would give others? Is that the same advice you would give me if I was a male, if I was Caucasian, if I, you know? And so it is a challenge because we're double minorities, women of color, women. And so in educational leadership, you don't need research, you just look around. Who's in these educational roles up in higher education, in your organization? And one of the other challenges too is when we're called upon, there's an expectation that we represent the entire community. And I, for one, never claimed to represent all of Latinas. And so I cannot speak to about in the experience of all women of color. You know, I'm going to be part of a task force, and bringing these conversations to light are something that is invigorating to me. But I also know that I want actions behind this, and I want to know what is going to change, because what I do and have learned through USC and experiences and just life is, if you want something to be sustainable, and if you want, you have to create experiences for people, whether it is that just the way they rattled you with their comment, and you give them that open-ended question, maybe in that moment in time, they will tell you whatever's politically correct, walk away. My hope is that they reflect on it and think later, because those experiences shape our beliefs, and our beliefs are what informs our actions. And so if I can do that at some level to change somebody's experience of whatever they've done for me as a woman and as a woman of color, then I feel like I've done something, at least for that individual to think twice about their views, because it is, gender bias is alive and well, as is others.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
I'm going to add yes to everything Dr. Leon said, and then I want to ask for forgiveness, because in no way in what I'm about to say is how I feel about the men on this panel or in my life. Some of my best mentors, outside of the two wonderful women I mentioned, have been men. But when you talk about women in leadership, and then you drill down even further to women of color, there's a couple things we need to check. So I'll give you some of my experiences, and then I'll wrap it up. I'm too outspoken. I'm too feisty. I'm aggressive. You got to learn when to be quiet. Smile more. You sure that's a fit for you? And I could go on and on and on. But the point is, we have to check our mindset about the role of women in work. Men, those things that I just said, I have never witnessed. I'm just going to say witnessed a man be told to smile more. A man can look the part and exude confidence, but that's not always synonymous to competence. And I don't want to talk about this conversation. I want to be careful how we frame it, because we don't have a women in leadership issue for lack of quality candidates. I just have to put that out there, because most of the workforce in education is female, but that does not translate when it comes to leadership. And so we have to get to the root causes. We have to work, as Dr. Leon so eloquently said, to change mindsets, because your beliefs do inform practices. So we always hear about the good old boys club, but I've never heard about the good old girls club. And so we have to be intentional. And one thing I love about USC is Dr. Karen Sims Gallagher and her work to be intentional about creating those pipelines for women and women of color in leadership positions. And that's what I need other universities and boards of education to implement is, where is the pipeline? Because I have served under men with less experience, less degreed. I don't even want to get into that. But they get the role because they're men, but it's not the men in the system's fault. We have boards who represent communities who have fixed mindsets about our capabilities. We're more than capable to lead large and small districts. We're more than capable to lead rural, suburban, and urban districts. And so I just need intentionality. And as Dr. Leon said, it is one of my goals that I check my bias and that I don't give to other women what has been given to me. And then I love what you said, Dr. Leon, and I leave everyone with this. And this is more for the men. I'm sorry, I'm not putting you on the spot, but I want everyone to ask themselves these questions. Would have I said that if that were a man? Would I have done that if that were a Caucasian man? Would I have pressed the issue if a man had said something versus a woman? Because I think those small nuances of how we go about our day-to-day jobs is very influential into setting up this construct that we're only good for certain things. So I need intentionality, and I need our universities, our boards of education to take the role that Dr. Karen Sims Gallagher is taking in creating that pipeline of women leadership, because it's not for lack of quality or qualified applicants, I should say.
Thanks for sharing those things. If I could add a comment as a man, not always qualified to comment on these topics, but you have the Board of Education to hire superintendents. There's a lot of hiring to be done below superintendent level that we have control over. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us of who are we mentoring, right? And who are we promoting, and who are we encouraging in the way that all of us have been encouraged to take that step. And if any of you are like me, we all have our moments of self-doubt and the imposter syndrome, the posers. You belong. And so don't ever question that. Yeah, everybody in this room is so capable and should be going for whatever positions you feel like you fit. Matt or Lawton, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just add that, as I had mentioned earlier, I agreed, Shawna, tremendously with you. Some of my greatest coaches, mentors are females in this role and in higher roles, and have been tremendous. I'm fortunate. My wife is a physician, and she's the breadwinner in our home, and I have two young daughters so they've taught me the way. And I think what's the beautiful thing of living with three strong ladies is that they have certainly put me in my place often. And so I think that's important. And it makes my lens, again, when I'm hiring, as Dr. Franklin said, I think we're in position to, and not just race, ethnicity, gender, in thinking about our hiring practices. I think we have a hugely powerful role to play in that, and can shape our districts accordingly.
Thank you, Matt.
And I'm going to let Dr. Petit-Dinkins and Leon, I'm looking at what they said because I couldn't put it any better. So
I want to follow up on that article that I mentioned, leading when change is out of our control. Australia found the article, and I think she might put it in the chat. But she read it, and she said, the author talks about learning to trust your instincts. I think that's an interesting question. What's the process of learning to trust your instincts? And can any of you share the ups or downs of an experience when you did that?
I can chime in because if you have integrity with what you do, that's where your instinct comes from. And so if I know that I'm doing the right thing by students and I profess that, then I need to live into that. And so there are challenges, like I can give you multiple examples of well, can you do this for my student? And if it's not equitable for our students, then no. And, you know, of course, there are times for exceptions. However, that gets challenged all of the time. And so it's the instinct that you get because you have integrity with what you do, and trusting that to know, does this align with what I believe? Does this align with my vision, what I say about my job, my work ethic? And if it doesn't, and if it feels ugly, it is. If it feels like you're going to wrong somebody, or you're going to create some kind of disproportionality with representation, that's what you go by.
Thank you.
I think you also have to be open to making mistakes. You'll make, I make maybe 100 to 200 decisions a day. And sometimes that decision may not be right. It might not be the right one. But I agree with Dr. Leon, as long as you come from a standpoint of you have your ethics, you know what's right and wrong. But once again, you may make a wrong decision, and you have to own up to that. You have to accept it, and you have to work to change if there did cause some harm to someone or something. You have to work on rebuilding that relationship. But we have to make difficult decisions a lot, and sometimes you don't make the right ones. And the main thing is, once again, accepting that you made a mistake, or you didn't make a mistake, but you just didn't choose the right option. And how do I make the situation now better? But we have to be real with ourselves that we're not gonna be perfect as administrators, because I think that's the problem, is that people wanna be perfect and think that we're perfect. And we have to make sure they understand we are people just like anyone else. And we will make mistakes, but I think how we handle those mistakes is important. A prime example is we hire people. If we have a poor hire, we don't just keep them on because hey, we don't know. You know what, that was a bad hire. You know what, we work with them, we try to get them to do better, give them improvement plans. It didn't work. So we have to be honest with ourselves and be able to accept that we make mistakes and then make things better from that mistake.
One of my mentors was Mike Escalante. I worked for him in Fullerton High School District. And then when he went to Glendale, I went with him as the assistant sup. And when he's talking about instincts, he talks about your core values. You know, you're going to do what you think is right based on your core values. That's what feels right. But everything we do is product and process. So you might have a core value and an instinct to end up here. But remember, we better process things, because it doesn't matter where you end up if you don't do it through a process that is inclusive, that builds support, that brings people on board. Then you can make the right decision in the wrong way and come out a loser. And so I think the instincts are informative, but you better not only rely on the instincts, right? Let's go to one final question maybe before we wrap it up, or it might be time to wrap it up. Australia, are you there?
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
One more, let's do it. If you could tell us one skill that you have found most important to your success in your current role, what would that be? Let's start back at the top with Matt. You let us off. Why don't we go to you for this?
I think one skill for me, I feel, and I think I've learned this as I've gotten to be a cabinet member, because as a principal, you're talking about instincts. Like my instincts, I felt like I had lots of decision making, and I could make a quick decision, and I could, and I could impact that. I think of adaptability really, and being adaptive and understanding now, as I'm closer to working certainly with the superintendent and working with the Board of Education, I have to be thinking, I have to adapt, because my ability is leading a school is much different than now. I feel like I've not led anything in a long time, right? As a principal, I felt like I'm really leading something. Now I, will defer to our superintendent, supporting them, defer, and working with the board. I think of them, many times. So I think that adaptability is important, and understanding situation. And so for me, that has been it. And under any situation you go into, really important to be able to adapt.
Shawna, one skill most important to your success currently.
Ooh, careful, thoughtful, respectful consideration and engagement with all stakeholders.
So easy to say, so difficult to do.
It's a skill I learned from USC. You just have to be willing. You got to be willing to pivot. That adaptability is important. And you got to be willing to determine what is important or what is important to you versus what is right. And then sometimes you got to be willing to give that position up for the greater of the whole. And if you're going to be staunch about everything, you'll make very little progress. So I have non-negotiables. I will always call out injustice and inequity, but you just got to be flexible and leverage challenges to go through that process, as you so stated previously, so that you end in a good place. Because as great of a leader as you may be, you're only as good as your last decision.
Elizabeth?
So one is really difficult to pick, however. You know, there's technical skills and then there's those soft skills. For the technical skills, it's being an instructional leader because that is the groundwork that I'm doing. And for those soft skills, it's having that integrity, which will lead you, and, you know, at the same time, being relatable and being able to connect. You have to connect with children, first and foremost, connect with your staff, connect with your parents. And so one of each, one technical and one soft skill.
Thank you. Lawton?
For me, it would have to be flexible. Right now, I'm used to having a lot of answers and kind of having that control. And right now, there is no control. And so for me, it's being vulnerable and being able to accept I don't have all the answers and being flexible.
Well, I want to thank all of you. What great role models, examples, Trojans you four are. We appreciate you sharing your time and your own journey and being vulnerable. I think I especially appreciate it when people are willing to share from the heart and from their own experiences. I also want to thank Matt and Australia from the Rossier School. They put all of this together and helped all five of us prepare, so we appreciate them. I also want to say just welcome. I know he's not on the line, but Shawna mentioned Dean Gallagher, who has been awesome for the last 20 years. And I think our future is bright with Pedro Noguera. The new dean is phenomenal, and he's going to pick up the baton from Karen and just keep moving us forward. So that's exciting. And
I'm sorry, real quick. This is not for Michigan, by the way. This is for my high school, John Muir. Just so you know, it's not a Michigan shirt.
That's important. Thanks for clarifying. I also want to remind everybody that as we talk about the quality of the cohorts we all participated in, keep recruiting those bright young folks to get into the program. Keep that Trojan pipeline flowing. And the one final thing I want to do before I turn it to Australia, there's a poem I like. Just wanted to share it with you. It's called The Contract, A Word from the Lead. And in the end, we follow them, not because we're paid, not because we might see some advantage, not because of the things they have accomplished, not even because of the dreams they dream, but simply because of who they are. The man, the woman, the leader, the boss, standing up there when the wave hits the rock, passing out faith and confidence like life jackets, knowing the currents, holding the doubts, imagining the delights and terrors of every landfall, captain, pirate, and parent by turns. The bearer of our countless hopes and expectations, we give them our trust, we give them our effort. What we ask in return is that they stay true. Go get them, Trojans. We're proud of you guys, and keep moving on.
Thanks, Dr. Franklin.
Thank you, Greg. I would like to take this. Oh, go ahead, Shawna.
Well, I was just saying, fight on. Thank you.
Great. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists and moderator, Greg Franklin, for sharing their career journeys and providing valuable tips and advice for our attendees. As I mentioned earlier, a recording of today's webinar will be sent out in the next few days. When you close out of today's webinar, a short survey will appear. Please take a moment to provide feedback on today's webinar and share your ideas for future virtual programs. Don't forget to tag us on social media using the hashtag #RossierLeads. Thank you for attending. Have a great day and fight on. Bye, everyone.